So this is where we left off last time. We took a look at the node editor, and now let's take a look at the parameter editor up here. For this, first of all, let's jump back out to OBJ level, and maybe let's get rid of our test geometry to make our scene a little more simple by just selecting the node here and hitting delete on our keyboard. Let's select the box node, let's jump inside, and let's take a look at the parameter editor, maybe for the first box node. So for a lot of parameters, you have little nice UI elements like this, for example, the slider up here. Or you can, for example, adjust values using the viewport tools like this. But maybe you want to adjust specific values right here in this parameter field that also maybe don't get their specific viewport handle. And of course you can select the values right here and maybe type in a specific value, but maybe you also want to adjust these values, maybe like with this simple slider down here. But of course in here you don't get a slider. What you can do instead is you can middle click on a specific value and you get this value ladder. And by moving left and right, I can adjust the value. And by moving up and down, I can adjust the step size or the amount that I'm adjusting by moving left and right. So I can get a lot smaller or a lot larger. Next, let's jump down to a polybevel node. And what you can see on a lot of nodes, for example, also on a color node, is that lots of nodes have a group field up here. And what this group field does is it allows you to limit the effect of each node to a specific part of the geometry. To use this group field, I can hit this little arrow at the right side. Now my viewport changes and I have this little blue explainer text down here that tells me to select the geometry that I want my polybevel to affect. And for example, I can up here choose the edge selection and maybe select this edge right here. Now this edge is highlighted, and if I'm happy with my selection, I can press enter. And again, the position of my mouse in here is important. So with my mouse in my 3D viewport, I can hit enter, and now the polybevel is applied only to this edge that I selected here. And of course, this will change depending on what type of geometry I select. So for example, if I hit this arrow again and then maybe select my face selection up here and then select this area right here and hit enter, then I get this bevel right here. Now, one thing that might have happened to you at this point is you've gone through parameters, entering values, and maybe you've got a typo. Maybe, for example, you typed 0,1 instead of 0.1 and hit enter. And now a lot of stuff happened. First of all, our geometry is gone, our polybevel node seems very unhappy, as is our color node, and also a parameter in here turned green. So what the hell happened here? What we did by adding a comma in here is make Houdini think that we entered an expression inside this field, because this comma is not part of a normal number. So for Houdini, it must be part of a bigger expression. And of course, this expression isn't working. So we get an error down here. And because this node is erroring, this node down here is erroring as well. And we also don't get any geometry. So how can we fix this? First of all, we can, of course, exchange our comma to a point. Now everything is working again, but we still have a green parameter field in here. And the reason that it is green is that by entering an expression, we told Houdini that we want to control this parameter field by what's called a channel. And a channel in Houdini is pretty much everything that is not just a simple non-animated value. It's something that is controlled by something else, either an animation or an expression or different things. So if you want to get rid of this green color, we can right click on our parameter field and simply say delete channels. And now we're almost back at normal. We get this very strange looking number right here with a lot of zeros and a 1 at the end. We can simply ignore this. We can just click on our name right here to get back to a simple slider. But of course, if we're not just entering expressions by accident, expressions can be very handy. And I want to give you a few little examples of expressions or channels inside Houdini that we can use. And the first one that we want to take a look at are, of course, keyframes, because in the end, we want to animate stuff in Houdini. So to add a keyframe, for example, to this bevel distance, I can right-click on the name or on the parameter field and go to keyframes and say set keyframe. And now on the position of my playhead inside my timeline right here, I now have this green flag that tells me that I entered a keyframe in here. So now I can move my playhead to a different position and also adjust the value to something different, maybe something like this. And then again, right clicking on my distance parameter, go to keyframes and then say commit change. And now our value gets turned green, which again tells me that we have a keyframe in here. And now if I scrub in my timeline, I get an animated bevel. I can of course also get rid of keyframes either by moving my playhead to a keyframe and then again going to the keyframe menu and saying remove keyframe. Or if I want to get rid of everything, I can of course always say delete channels to get rid of every keyframe. Right now, if I play my animation, this is the standard easy ease to move from one keyframe to the next. But of course, when I'm animating, I want to also change my animation curves. So how can I do this? For this, we have this animation editor window in Houdini, which is by default docked here. And I have my animation curve for my bevel node. And here the distance parameter that I'm animating. But of course, this is a pretty stupid place for the animation editor because I'm not seeing my viewport anymore. So what I can do to fix this is either take this tab right here and, for example, drag it here in this area up here and then switch back to my scene view. And I can see both at the same time. Or with my nodes selected here, I can hit either in the node editor or in the parameter editor, I can hit V on my keyboard to bring up a floating curve editor. And what I may want to do in here is make this handle a bit shorter and this handle a lot longer. And now I maybe have a more interesting animation. And also I can move keyframes in here to make my animation more interesting as well. I can also move keyframes in my timeline, and the shortcut for this is very complicated, so just write it down or come back to this video. To do this, I first of all press down and hold Shift on my keyboard, and then with my left mouse button pressed down and dragging, I can make a selection here in my timeline. Let's select both of our keyframes, and then with this selection done, I can press and hold down the middle mouse button to move my selection in my timeline. Overly complicated, but this is how it is done in Houdini. This is it for keyframes. Let's move on to some expressions. For this, for example, let's jump out of our node editor here, back to our OBJ view, and let's maybe say that we want to rotate our box around the y-axis. And of course, I could keyframe this, but I also could, for example, link this to the current frame that I'm on. And the way that I can do this is with dollar variables inside Houdini. If I select the value in my Y rotation right here and start by typing in dollar, I get a lot of options in here. And these are all variables that are in some way linked to my Houdini file in here, and the settings in that file. And we will take a look at much more complex examples of this later, which can be very handy. The only thing that I'm interested in here is $F, because $F is a current frame. And if I click out of the parameter and I scrub in my timeline, I can see that my box is rotating with the current frame. And of course, what I can do as well, for example, if I want to slow this rotation down, I can divide my current frame, for example, by 10, and now the rotation is a lot slower. Or I can multiply it by 10, and it gets a lot faster. And in here I can type in pretty much any mathematical expression that I want. Now, these are expressions using dollar variables. There's one last type of expression that I want to show you. For this, let's get rid of the channel right here. Let's reset this back to 0. And the last thing that I want to show you is creating a relative reference. For this, maybe let's add another object in our scene. Let's maybe add a sphere. And let's take our handles tool and let's move this sphere up above my box. And let's maybe build something that's not super useful, but just as a simple demo, let's build something where when I move my box in the z-axis, my sphere moves in the x-axis the same amount. So what I can do to create this is I can create a relative reference. Here, with my box node selected, I can go to the value that I want to change, and I can say here copy parameter. And now with my parameter copied, I can go to the sphere and to the area where I want to create my relative reference, right-click again and say paste relative references. Now an expression is added in here, And if I now move my box in the Z direction, my sphere moves in the X direction. So this is a simple way for me to link different values to each other. And again, for example, this is a pretty random link, but there are, of course, more useful cases that we will take a look at in this course. And of course, again, with this, I can get rid of this relative reference by simply saying delete channels. There are two last little tricks that I want to show you inside the parameter field. For this, maybe let's jump back into a box node and maybe to a polybevel. First of all, if you're adding a node to your scene and you may be adding that node for the first time and you want to know how this node works, as always on each node this little question mark symbol right here. And if I click on this, a very retro looking browser pops up where I get the Houdini reference entry for this node. And I can go through this and take a look at all the info that SideFX wants to tell me about this node. Also, if you get a notary from someone else and you want to have a quick overview over which values he has adjusted, you can first of all look for values that are written in bold, because bold means those values aren't the default values anymore. But you can also use this little search menu up here, and on here select parameters with non-default values, and now you're just getting a summary of all the values that I have adjusted in here. So this is it for our parameter editor and also the end of our quick overview over the very basics of Houdini. And in the next video, we'll finally jump into our first project where we'll take a look at how to create a squishy vellum animation. So until next time, it's cheers and goodbye.